two, one. Everyone, welcome back to Real Time Talk with Eagle 3D Streaming. You may recognize our guest today. He was on our panel a few weeks ago, and now he's coming back for us to have a one-on-one discussion. We have Jacob Feldman with us today from CoreWeave. And to briefly introduce Jacob, Jacob comes from a background in immersive entertainment and VFX. Inspired by the opportunity to enable creatives, Jacob joined CoreWeave, a specialized cloud serving up GPU compute at scale to empower media and entertainment businesses to realize the possibilities of cloud native productions. Today, Jacob is leading the charge at CoreWeave to create cloud infrastructure for pixel streaming and other real-time applications. Jacob, thank you so much for being on the show today. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. I'm recovering. I just finished recovering from COVID, and I'm ready to talk pixel streaming again.
Awesome. Well, glad you're on the up and up, and thank you again for joining. Before we get into our discussion today, I'd just like to go over the format for any first timers today. This is a live show, and participation is highly encouraged because we're just trying to get the information that you'd like to know about pixel streaming in your hands. So please don't hesitate to post a question on the YouTube chat, and Jacob, the Jedi, will answer the question for you. So Jacob, just to kind of, get things rolling, can you share a little bit about your background and how you sort of ended up at CoreWeave?
Yeah, for sure. So I kind of got into all this stuff back when I was in college. I when I was supposed to be studying for finals, I instead just kind of spent all night learning Maya. And ever since then, I've kind of had an obsession with 3D and VFX and all the bits and pieces that go into that. Towards the end of that experience and then going into my professional career, I really got into Unreal Engine and real time and all the technologies behind that. And I kind of ran with that. So I also, at the time had, picked up VR headsets, and I had fallen in love with that technology and ran with it. And when I started getting into doing things professionally, I would do, freelance VR experiences in Unreal. And eventually I ended up at an architecture visualization studio, and I was working on VR experiences, but also this crazy thing called pixel streaming, which at the time, was still in alpha or whatever. Though it only like just recently got out of beta even, so I don't even know if that's impressive or not. But back when it was in alpha, I was trying to hack together an infrastructure for us to use with with clients. So if you had a rich buyer who was buying a penthouse of some new property, you could send them a link to a pixel stream experience, and they could walk around and do whatever they need, right? So I started working on that and very quickly realized how awful the experience was trying to scale that into something that wasn't crazy expensive, and also worked, right, in the sense that you didn't have to like have just 6 GPUs in the closet and serving everyone off, or serving everyone off AWS and just like eating the bill, right? So I think we kind of fought that a little bit, and then all of a sudden, two of my now colleagues from CoreWeave, our CEO and our director of engineering, show up at our office saying, "Hey, we got lots of GPUs. Why don't you try pixel streaming?" And the rest is history. We had a fun call where they showed me this demo where things were just spinning up like magic, and I was like, "Wow, these guys have something." So I joined CoreWeave and started working, across kind of the media entertainment disciplines with VFX studios, with the folks who were still experimenting with pixel streaming, and kind of everywhere in between with media entertainment. So I would say my job today is, you know, most of our clients are still, VFX clients when it comes to the media entertainment sphere, because those are the folks who have, established big businesses that go out and look to build pipelines in the cloud. And then, but recently, and more recently, we start to hear from all of them, hey, do you guys do anything with Unreal? Like, we kind of think this is interesting. And so very, very quickly, all these kind of different disciplines are kind of merging into one kind of place. And I'm really excited for what pixel streaming and technologies like that have to offer for folks across media entertainment. So that's kind of my story, how I got here, and what I'm kind of thinking about day to day at CoreWeave. But there's obviously lots of bits and steps in between that that made all this possible. So
yeah, and we all kind of have our own little paths, and it's very cool the experiences you have. For the people watching that are hearing CoreWeave, the name CoreWeave for the first time, what does CoreWeave do?
Yeah, so we call ourselves a specialized cloud, which I think was mentioned in my intro. A specialized cloud is our own term because we compete, daily with the large generalized clouds, what we call them. So AWS, GCP, Azure. They're also called just like hyperscalers, whatever you want to kind of describe them as. And we essentially, the difference between our specialized cloud and the folks at Amazon or Google is that we focus on a few key high performance compute sectors of the cloud business. So we focus on VFX entertainment, batch processing, AI, and then of course streaming, pixel streaming, game streaming, etc. Right. So we focus in on those things, and what that means is that we can really tailor both the our data center hardware, as well as the solutions we offer to those specific kinds of customers. So if you want to come to us and like host a website, we're going to tell you no, right? We're not interested in that. So most of our clients, really are very large, and we offer them practical access to scale, and that's kind of become our hallmark. In addition to having just a much wider range of GPUs than most cloud providers. So we have about like 12 GPU SKUs, all the Ampere data center cards, A4000 up to, the A40, or A6000. And we offer those at scale for people to come in and do fun stuff like pixel streaming. So that's, I think, a decent overview of CoreWeave. We're currently based in North America, so we have data centers in Vegas, Chicago, and New York, and we're expanding as quick as we can. But right now we offer really low latency access to LA, Chicago, and of course the New York, area. So that's good for all the latency sensitive applications like pixel streaming.
So, for anyone that is thinking about doing pixel streaming with CoreWeave, what does that look like? I mean, what are we doing on the GPU side? What does that process sort of look like?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is when customers come to us talking about pixel streaming, there's a couple things that a couple questions that we generally ask. The first is, hey, do you guys want to build this infrastructure yourself? Meaning, like, do you want to come in here? Are you going to write the code? Are you going to, deploy it, manage it, all that? Right. If the answer is no, then most likely we're going to refer them to people like Eagle 3D, right? Who, manage and, kind of make pixel streaming and technologies like that accessible to people, right? Occasionally we get people in who want to do their own custom thing, and we say, go have fun. And it's, it's a challenge for them for sure. But, our infrastructure is based on Kubernetes. So it means we orchestrate everything in containers. So for those folks who haven't heard what a container is, I think I actually went through this on the last stream or whatever, but I'll do it again because it's cool and people should definitely look into it. Containerization is essentially this technology that allows you to kind of package up an application with all its dependencies. So, if we're talking about something like, what's a good example? Unreal is a really difficult example, so I'm trying not to use that. But something like, I don't know, Maya, right? So if you want to run Maya, you're going to install that on your computer, and it has a ton of libraries, dependencies that are already on your computer, or it installs for you, that are just there, right? But the problem is, if you just like if you drag the executable to a new computer, it's not going to run, right? Or if you move everything, if you install it onto another computer, it might run differently, right? Like you don't know. So the idea with containerization is that you package up an application with all its dependencies into this little like runnable container, like pod thing, and you launch it, on different machines, and it's going to run exactly the same everywhere, right? So our infrastructure is based off of that technology, and it gives you, a bunch of really awesome advantages like scale up time, reliability, scalability, all those things. So folks who want to come in and get their hands dirty with those things, can work with CoreWeave. Like we're totally, we don't pick and choose people, right? Or we'll work with anyone who wants to scale big and has some of the requirements I mentioned. Um, but we're also rolling out, kind of we're hoping to bring people like to a good starting point and give people the opportunity to build easier on CoreWeave all the time. But that's generally what the process kind of looks like.
Awesome. And we just had our first question come in. And the
Awesome.
question is, do you have a public GitHub repository? We are
I
looking for,
do.
or
What are they looking for?
they're looking for a GPU solution which can broadcast to 1,000 users.
Yeah. I believe technically we do have a public GitHub. I'm not sure how much is on it. But for folks who are looking to kind of get their feet wet in scaling pixel streaming, I like I said, I definitely recommend going to folks like Eagle 3D to kind of to get things started. Um, this is a big thing that we see all the time is folks who are just getting interested in pixel streaming. They want to go big, right? Like they want to scale up to thousands, million, whatever it is, right? And the thought is always, okay, how do I like create a really good experience for like 10,000 of my friends? And my thought is always, okay, why don't you start with how can I make a really good experience for like 10 of my friends and get paid for it, right? Like, how can I make sure that, what I'm doing today can be validated without needing this like crazy bill, right? Because even if you come to someone like CoreWeave or, work off our pricing, which is more aggressive than any of the other clouds when it comes to things like pixel streaming, like even if you work off that, it's not necessarily cheap, right? Like you're still using enterprise hardware and you're scaling, very big. So I always recommend to people like, hey, start small, make an experience people love at a small scale, and then, work on, building it into, a phenomenon, right? Like I think that's always the right way to go about it.
Mm. And one of the questions kind of on my mind is so what changes from going from 1 user to 10 users to 100 users to 1,000? Like,
Yes.
yeah.
So with 1 user, that's easy, right? That's super easy. You can get away with a lot, right? Meaning like your game can be very inefficient. It could be just a test. It might be laggy as hell, but that one person who is probably you, not going to care, right? That's just how it is, right? When you go to 10 people, if you're trying to actually like build something for people to really consume, let's say like a configurator or something like that, where you might have, you might have like 10 people, every hour who access it, we're not talking about like Ford's website, but like if you're trying to launch a product and you want to do pixel streaming for your product configurator, If you're trying to do 10 people, then you kind of have to think a little harder, right? Because you want to make sure the cost is somewhere that makes sense for your application. And so you might work a little bit to make sure that your game is optimized, that it kind of fits neatly into your, constraints in terms of performance and, financial constraints. And then when you go to something like 1,000, 10,000 users, then you really have to start thinking pretty big, and you need to make sure it is totally buttoned up. You got to make sure you're not wasting any compute, because you're going to have to fit that thing in like, probably 4 or 5 CPU cores, right? And there's a big difference between running an Unreal game at, 12 cores in a Windows VM and like 4 cores in a Linux Docker container. Like there's just a huge technical difference there. So in order to get there, people really need to, kind of do their homework and make sure that, the things they're producing are, well polished. Because when you start scaling up to 1,000, 10,000, like no matter who you go to, right? So CoreWeave, what we try to do is we try to have really nice sort of capacity planning, conversations with our customers. So if a customer says, hey, I need 10,000 GPUs now, we're probably going to tell them no, right? But if they say, 2 weeks in advance, 3 weeks in advance, whatever it is, right? 2 weeks in advance, hey, we have an event coming up in 2 weeks. We need 10,000 GPUs. We'll make it happen, right? So we try to have honest conversations with our customers about like, okay, what's their capacity, demand? Like, what are they going to need? And that way we can be prepared, from an infrastructure point of view, and they can be prepared or feel confident that they're going to get the infrastructure they need, right? So when you start scaling big, you also have to start thinking about stuff like that, right? You have to make sure you have the capacity, that you're telling your provider, hey, we're going to be doing this now, or we're going to be doing this in a month, right? And I think those logistics are not, always intuitive. Like people who are thinking about, doing, 10,000 person concerts, are probably thinking about the concert experience and don't want to think about the infrastructure. And, that's some of the challenge that I think as a cloud, we kind of come across pretty consistently.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of pixel streaming experiences at this point, just from an application standpoint. In your mind, and for anyone who's considering or is in the process of developing their experience, what can I do to separate mine from the rest? What
Yeah.
makes a good pixel streaming experience, would you say?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to say there. I think the first thing is, if you have an idea for an experience, like let's say, all right, I just went to an awesome EDM festival and I'm going to try to host that I'm going to create a metaverse for EDM festivals where it's all going to be pixel streamed. You're going to have awesome lights. It's going to be the best performance, right? Like, let's say you have that idea, right? And you're like, okay, I'm going to go and build this. I think one of the pitfalls people fall into is like, okay, like I'm going to try and replicate my experience at that EDM festival as best as possible in Unreal Engine, right? So they're gonna have the stage, they're gonna have the crowd, and they're like, oh, we need like 10,000 NPCs in here to make it feel right, I think in some cases that might be what you need, right? Like in some cases that might be the ideal experience. I think in most cases it's not, right? I think in most cases people need to kind of reconsider, what their experiences might look like in a completely different context, which is like the metaverse, which is, real time, which is all these technologies that allow you to do things that are just not possible in reality, right? So I think if people are really creative about the space they use, they kind of consider the dimensions of this like virtual world, then you can start. I think you should start from the bottom up, saying, okay, what does the ideal like EDM festival look like in the metaverse? And I get the feeling you'll probably come to something very different than if you like just kind of replicated it, right? I back in school, I wrote this thesis and I had this exercise that I went through, and I was thinking about virtual reality or really just digital worlds and architecture, the way we experience spaces, right? And I had this sort of thought exercise where I would take a room that I was in and I would start to remove items that weren't necessary in the digital space. So like, oh, well, I can get rid of that window. There's no weather here. Like, I'm not going to get a breeze unless I want it, right? Okay, I'll remove the window, right? Oh, tables, like they don't need legs, right? Like I could just take the legs off the table. Like tables are nice. They're kind of like work surface. We kind of need to envision things. I'll keep that, right? And if you keep doing that, you're going to find yourself in like the void with like a table, right? Like that. That's it, right? So I'm not saying your spaces should look like that, but I am saying like think through those things. I think it can be pretty fascinating. The other part is definitely when it comes to multiplayer, right? Like how do you want people to interact with others in this virtual space? And I think in some cases it can be life changing to experience an interaction with someone else who is completely different from you, who is across the world and speaks a different language, or there's definitely lots of times where that is just a surreal experience for people. Yeah. And there's other times when it's a distraction, right? Like there's certainly times when, like, for example, I'm not going to say who this was because I actually really loved this experience. But my only criticism was that there was a virtual theater performance that I saw in a pixel streaming experience. And the performance was awesome. I loved the sets. I loved the actor. They had real-time actors. The biggest distraction, however, was all the other audience members had little like motes and emotes that would fly around. And I felt like, it's great. It makes me feel like I'm experiencing this with other people. Like, that's good. But it's also a bit of a distraction to have like someone like zipping around the main character's head, right? Like, I don't necessarily need that, right? So I think it's all about your application. A lot of us really have, especially folks who are, I don't know, I guess like at least 20. I have memories of like movie theaters, right? And going with friends to movie theaters and experiencing something. And I think a lot of us, kind of look to replicate those kinds of experiences in this new kind of digital domain. And I think in a lot of cases, that's a really valid purpose. But in a lot of cases, I think folks kind of just underestimate the number, the scale of changes, the scale of like everything is different, right? Once you get into a digital world, and you have to really think hard about what still makes sense in that digital world. So that's a very long-winded explanation, but that's this is the kind of thing I think about a lot. So
no, I think that's very well said, because the crawl walk run is definitely a good approach where don't go for broke 10,000 concurrent users initially. Just dial in a really good 10 user experience, and we don't have to have gravity in the digital world, and so we can fly, or so don't mirror, don't recreate the physical environment digitally. Think about what's best for the experience.
Exactly.
So I noticed that you're wearing Open XR shirt, so heck yeah. So just talking about like Cloud XR and maybe the potential there, because it's becoming maybe an emerging or hotter topic. What's it going to be like streaming into VR? Have you tried it yet? What are your thoughts? Is it good? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah. So I mean, back in the day, the even when we got to Oculus CV1 days, people were talking about, hey, wouldn't it be cool if like I didn't have to attach this to my computer, right? And everyone was like, oh man, that would be the coolest. Then the Oculus Quest came out, and all the experiences looked like they were from 20 years ago because it was a mobile processor. Then everyone's like, I don't know, I think I'll connect back to my computer. That like there was something there, right? And I think a lot of people, especially the real nerds around VR, which is like, in my opinion, the majority of VR users are like VR nerds. It's changed a lot because of the stuff that Oculus, Meta, whatever. I'm going to call it Oculus. I feel like if you've if you own a DK1, an Oculus DK1, you should be able to just call it an Oculus, but that's another rant. So Oculus has done a lot to make it a more pervasive technology, and so like my parents have Oculus headsets, but I think most of the people who use VR are VR nerds, and I think a lot of them kind of went back and reevaluated their priorities and found, oh man, the Valve Index is a pretty nice headset. I wish it was wireless, but I like the experiences better, right? Because of the fidelity, because of all this other stuff. And I think kind of, what people realize is, oh, well, it would be really nice if we could have the best of both worlds. Like if I could have my Oculus headset and I could stream something to it at the highest fidelity, and the headset can handle that just fine, right? It can handle decoding a stream. And there were big problems with that. The first is the latency. Like people get nauseous if you have something more than like, well, it depends on which headset. Like back in the Oculus CV1 days, the first Oculus and the first HTC Vive, you would get nauseous if you had more than like 5 milliseconds of latency, 5, 10. And that's on top of like the frame time, right? So like average VR frame time in those days was like 10 milliseconds, was like what everyone says, oh, you should have your experiences within 10 milliseconds, ideally lower, right? But an additional kind of 5 millisecond line latency, fine, right? Like you'd be okay. Anything past that, you start getting pretty nauseous, and you had to like, I remember all the times like laying on the floor, like I was dead because I was so nauseous and I could not move, right? Now, and so, when people started to think about all these solutions, they're like, okay, the cloud will never make sense, right? Like the cloud is so far away. Like, how am I ever going to get all the way to the cloud without, puking all over the floor? But then what happened was, Oculus came out with, Oculus and HTC both came out with technologies like asynchronous time warp that will do predictive, frame rendering, right? Which will, already be rendering the frame you're going to see, before you've even turned, right? That kind of thing. And it makes a huge difference, like an enormous difference, this technology. And it's enabled on every headset now. Like you won't buy a VR headset today that doesn't have this technology in it. And once you do that, you can push the latency a lot further than you think, right? Like when I used to do VR visualizations for like architecture, my boss at the time was like, as long as it's like 30, 40 milliseconds, I think it's fine. Like for frame time, it's like 30 frames per second. I was like, this is awful. Like I can't stand this. But to some extent, he was right. Like the customers couldn't tell, even at 30 frames per second, that like it was having issues because, they would just move their heads. Like they weren't going to do all this crazy like maneuvering that really gets you nauseous, right? And so they were fine, right? But I think really, the latency budget opened up opportunities to do more streaming. And when NVIDIA came along with Cloud XR, we finally kind of had a solution that was, interchangeable. It worked on a bunch of platforms. They kind of had good, the libraries were complete enough that people could go out and like actually build on top of them. And I think it really enabled a lot. Now, originally it wasn't actually built on OpenXR. It was built on SteamVR, but I think recently in their more recent evolutions, upgraded to OpenXR platform, which means if you're used to developing VR, AR projects in, Unreal, for example, you're going to use all the OpenXR standard stuff, by default now, and your applications are just kind of point and click to, OpenXR, which I think is awesome. And when you try it, it's really good. Like I'm just going to go out and say it. Like I am a total stickler for VR experiences, and it's good. Like it's good enough for me to say I would prefer to use, my Quest with Cloud XR than pick up and try to like, reconnect my Valve Index and like deal with all the driver issues and all that bullshit, right? Like I would rather just stick to my Oculus and, take it all from the cloud, right? Like, and I think that's going to make a big difference. And I think what it really enables is when people are thinking about, the future of, entertainment, my thought has always been, okay, well, the obvious evolution is, okay, we had movies, we had photos, then the photos became moving, and we got movies, and then the movies became interactive, and we got like games, and then what's next? Like I've always felt, okay, well, immersive entertainment's what's next. Like it just gets closer and closer to your face, right? And immersive entertainment is only really going to, I think, blossom if we get the fidelity to the point where people can be convinced. I'm not saying we should convince them, for the record. Can be convinced that it's reality, right? And that it's accessible, right? That people can access those experiences without the need for additional hardware. They shouldn't have to go out and buy a huge gaming PC to be able to experience this. They should just need a headset and a decent internet connection, right? Like that's what it should take. So when we talk about like building the metaverse, I think Cloud XR, and streaming and pixel streaming is kind of the way we're gonna make that possible. So yeah, I'm really excited for what it's doing.
Yeah, it's sort of like in Ready Player One, where I just put on my headset and I
Yeah.
can be convinced, that I'm
Right.
in a different place.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely lots of debate about whether that's like what we should be doing. But
yeah, that's a whole nother podcast.
yeah.
Well, Jacob, I can't believe it. We're already up to the half hour. I
Yeah.
mean, it goes by super fast with you just because you have so many
Uh,
insightful things to say. Any closing thoughts or remarks you're thinking?
I like I said, I'm really excited about what pixel streaming is going to do in the future. I think folks today should really think big about the sorts of things that they can accomplish with both real time and the accessibility that pixel streaming brings. And I think people should really think beyond even, the stuff that comes to mind immediately, like the concerts and the configurators and the trade shows, all that stuff totally makes sense. But there's just, I think, such a broad area of things that can be accomplished. And I really want people to think big and start small.
Oh, very well said. Thank you, Jacob, so much. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Please be sure to like and share if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe, turn on notifications so you know when we're going live. Jacob, thank you again. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Real Time Talk with Eagle 3D Streaming. We'll catch you on the next show.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See you later. Bye. And we are off.
Awesome.